I said, hey, can you come to Washington, D.C. and talk at my thorium conference? And Jim was like, fine. And, and I just said, oh, great, thank God, I got one more speaker, and it was the finest, best thing that probably happened to the Thorium Energy Alliance to have Jim come there, letting us know what the real deal was. Jim has a rare earth mine and is ridiculously pursuing a plan to get America back on the road to making its own rare earths. And I say ridiculous because it's at great cost to himself. Jim is a real patriot, and he really believes in the United States and in the West and democracy. And over the years, I've become very impressed with his commitment to this. But like I said, Jim is into the rare earths, and when you find rare earths, you find thorium. Or to put it better, if you want to find rare earths, go looking for thorium. Jim and I gave a talk at the Society of Mining Engineers, and right before us, one of our other supporters, Jim Hedrick, gave a talk, and he had just left the United States Geological Survey. Jim Hedrick is a very laid-back fella, and he's standing up there and very laconically, he's like, so these are the materials that we were very reliant on back in 1985. And now those are the ones we're reliant on today. And I was like, holy crap! Oh, I was like, are you kidding me? And he's, and he was like, oh yeah, we're in a really bad way. And so that chart right there is why it's so important for us all to work together and for Jim and the Thorium Energy Alliance to succeed together. But for now, please give a hand to Jim Kennedy. Thanks, Jim.
Let me start by saying when I went to that first conference, I was in D.C. anyway. I started, I wasn't flying out because I had no idea what it was. And I had been lobbying on behalf of the United States in resolving this rare earth crisis. So when I went in there, I was going to explain to the group how they were linked, and if you could just get rid of this darn thorium, we could save American industries. I look out in the crowd, and these guys are like, you've got thorium? Where do we get it? And I'm like, oh my God, it's the biggest problem in the world. So I'm going to give you guys a summary of what we've learned over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. talking about how to save the United States and get us back on track and get a rare earth economy value chain going back in this country when I met John. And what I'm going to say is 2 Senate bills later, and a standalone thorium rare earth bill that we worked on and had written and finished through LC. This is what I can tell you we know. John and I have probably sat down with practically every person on the Senate Energy Committee, most of the folks on the House Energy Committees, and that's true for natural resources. So this is what I can tell you we know. We know there is no federal money to do this. So a lot of people are eager to see the government break out $100 million or $1 billion to do this. The money's not there. It's not going to happen. You have to embrace that. There's no political will to sponsor alternative nuclear. We sat down with pro-nuclear people that were saying, we believe what you've got here is the right thing to do, but publicly no one's going to commit themselves to alternative nuclear. And there's a lot of reasons why. And so there's no political will. You're not going to convince a majority of people to stand up and say, let's start building a lifter in this country, because they just see too much risk in it. The next thing we learned is that the DOE basically opposes the molten salt liquid fuel cycle. Then you step down and you go, well, the national labs will support us, won't they? Well, no, they won't. The national labs won't do anything the DOE does not give them express support to do. This is a hard and sad fact of life. where we're at is you have no support where you think you would get support from the Department of Energy. It's not there, and you can't step down to the national labs because nobody's going to risk their career and get behind this in a big way. So what do we learn next? We learned that the DOE and the national labs conspire together to transfer this technology to China. So, you have to embrace this. These people are afraid of this technology, and they think if we can just move it over there, that it won't hurt us. It's coming back. So this is the irrationality of politics in Washington, D.C. So you go, well, private industry will fund this, the finance guys, the venture capital guys. I worked 15 years in the finance industry. I'll tell you this. There's absolutely, positively no long money. When I say long money, that means somebody is going to throw down $100 million or $1 billion and see what happens in 10 years. It doesn't exist. Now, if you come to them with the answer and you've solved the regulatory issue, you will quickly find that you don't own anything and now they've got it, and they'll probably turn around and sell it to the Chinese. But there's no long money. Okay? And then another thing is, this is not the next social network, okay? This is not the next social network. This is actually more challenging than when the Europeans got together and created Airbus to take on Boeing. Okay? What did they do? That's the size of this. It's bigger than that. It's one step bigger than that. So what I can tell you is there's insufficient support in Washington, D.C. for thorium MSR on a standalone basis. You can't get around that. December 2009, John and I hatched this crazy idea. We knew this had to happen, and we knew we would have opposition. We didn't actually believe at that time that DOE would be one of our obstacles. But what we did hatch at that time was I said, John, just like I said at your first conference, if we could solve the thorium problem, we can solve the rare earth problem. So what we do know, our Congress has accepted that the rare earth issue is a national security issue. They recognize that it's an economic issue of massive proportions. So they get that. So what we also know is that thorium and rare earths are linked at the mineralogical level. And the U.S. will never be able to challenge China and build a value chain in rare earths until we solve the thorium problem. So if we put those two things together and we sell it primarily as a rare earth cooperative concept, then we can put ourselves on the road to making the MSR project a reality. So what we did was we packaged these two. And then John and I thought, man, we've got the answers. We're going to go sell this to Congress. And it didn't matter if we went into a Republican's office or a Democrat's office. As soon as we said, hey, we're going to solve the rare earth problem, and the first thing we need to do is create a co-op, an old-fashioned farmer co-op. And they'd go, that sounds pretty communist to me. Or, you want a monopoly? We said, no, co-ops, they're red and they're white and they're blue, they have stars on them. It's what made the United States great. It made us the greatest exporter of agriculture in the world. And they just couldn't get over it. They could get it in their head, but the only thing they could think about was somebody standing up going, isn't that communist? And have you ever been a communist? So this is the problem, right? And so we have that problem to deal with. And then we also have bumped into that problem inside the group of advocates for thorium. Some people think that the free markets are going to solve this problem. Some people think that, hey, I'm going to open up my garage, put 2 chairs in there, just like Steve Jobs, and we're gonna build Apple Computer. It's not like that. You're literally taking on a government, and you're taking on a government that's got a mission that is so it's like the high-powered laser, airborne aircraft for a laser. These guys are going to do this thing, and no matter what you do in that garage, they're going to own it, control it, or squash you. You can't beat the country. And so they think that they're just going to take on China, or that somebody's going to say, hey, here's $10 billion. Call me up like in 2026, let me know how it's going. I don't really need to know what's going on with that money. It's just not going to happen like that. You're looking at challenging China. You're looking at a hostile DOE. You're looking at no regulatory pathway and coal, oil, natural gas, solar, wind, all against you because they're all worried about whether you're going to show up at the table and have a seat on it. They don't want you there. So look, this is all silly and this isn't how things get done. And we're going to talk about how things used to get done in this country. So this is Economics 101. You guys will all get 3 credit hours if you sit through. A wonderful book, a world-changing book, was once called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. I'm here to talk to you about the nature and loss of the wealth of nations. We're going to talk about the first 200 years in this country, and then we're going to talk about the last 40 years. The first 200 years in this country, we were under the capitalist system that Adam Smith described. Our government applied tariffs. Our government provided free land for agriculture, for homesteading, for mining claims, for railroads. These were subsidies, handouts, unabashed promotions of private industry. Until co-ops could create a grain elevator that could attract a rail line that could then result in a town around that thing. All these poor farmers would all harvest everything in the same 30 or 40 days. They'd all run it somehow to a barge shipping point on a river, and guess what the price of corn was? 0. In fact, we have to charge you because we can't ship your corn anywhere. Sorry. So what happened was America's farmers were starving and dying. And Congress got involved and said, look, we need a co-op system. We need these people to actually be able to work together in a legal framework so that they can protect their interests. So that grain elevator can let a little bit of grain go out all 12 months of the year. So that its farmers can know that they'll have prices and markets for their goods. So later came federal support for the energy industry, and if anybody hasn't read The Prize, I promise you, this book will open your eyes. Our government started subsidizing energy militarily for over 100 years. We're not talking about just tax breaks. We're talking about Navy ships. We're talking about boots on the ground. Energy hegemony was the basis and still is the broken basis of our political system today. Why are we in Iraq and Afghanistan? Why? Because we want to influence and control energy to influence and control nations. And that's not working anymore because that's a 100-year-old form of energy, and it no longer has what it takes to move us forward. If you look at the 20th century and you look where all of our energies in our country came from, they all came from various subsidies, the heavy hand of government getting involved and making things happen. The interstate highway system was put together as a military program. What did it spawn? The auto industry, commerce, aerospace programs. Those were heavily militarily influenced. And through those, alloys, electronics, the nuclear programs that came out of the war effort. Once again, applied physics. So for decades, the most important exports of the United States were the direct result of government industrial policy in our lives. Today, industrial policy is such a bad word in Washington, D.C., they will usher you out the door. As we redefine Adam Smith's works and redefine free market capitalism, in the early 70s, Milton Friedman essentially reauthored the concept of free markets defined around basically a leveraging system. Capital was no longer something we built. Capital was something we leveraged against. This ideology, what everybody in Washington, D.C., Democrat and Republican, when they say I'm a free market capitalist, what they're talking about has no place in the developmental history of the United States. The capital became subservient to the monetary part of the system. It created a vehicle for deconstructing the entire industrial capital base of our nation. They called it wealth creation, and during the 80s, we all felt richer. But we felt richer because what we were doing was essentially selling off multiple generations of capital that had been invested by our country. Hundreds and hundreds of great American companies were literally just turned into a yard sale, and everything they had was sold off and offshored. We need to get back to the traditions of what made this country great. And by the way, somebody's doing this, and it's China. If you basically study what China's doing, what they've done is they've taken the original concepts of Smith and they've incorporated them into everything they do economically and politically. Smith was a mercantilist. They try to tell you he wasn't. He was. He wanted a better toolbox for the English so they could outperform their rivals. Everything he said was, how do we enrich the crown? How do we create the wealth of nations? And this is what China's doing, and we can't figure it out. We can't get our heads around it. I'm going to give you one example, and I want you to think about this one simple little example and remember that it happens in every industry and in every way. In 1986, the Chinese government completed a plan called 863. In this plan, they decided that they were going to become the world dominant controller of the entire value chain of rare earths. Today, the entire value chain of rare earths, from mining all the way to alloys, is only worth $3 billion. That's it. What's $3 billion to the government, right? Any government. But with that $3 billion a year in income for this very, very tiny sector, they control $4.6 trillion in value-added goods. You know, this isn't the stuff you're buying at the dollar store. This is your iPhone. This is the targeting systems on an A1 Abrams tank. They control the value added there. We don't. 1986, Deng Xiaoping made this decision. They control over $4.6 trillion in value-added goods. The technologies that are dependent on these resources, the companies that own the IP and the technologies and the processes were forced to physically take their plants and move them inside China to get a secure supply. So these guys are skimming the intellectual capital of multiple generations over a $3 billion market. How do we do things here in the United States? We build aircraft carriers. So a single aircraft carrier costs $10 billion. Batteries are not included. That does not include the 5,000 sailors. That does not include the 180 aircraft that go on that. We invest $10 billion in one part of a naval group that makes up a Navy, that's part of a military that has the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and the NSA. We're spending $800 or $900 billion a year projecting power. China, we don't know how much they invested to control this resource, but they're making $3 billion a year, and they're controlling $4.6 trillion. The United States and projected power. What does it get us? Wars in Iraq, Pakistan, some future fun in Syria, maybe Iran. What does this cause? Massive, massive debt. And who's loaning us the money? Does anybody find the irony in this? What has it earned us? It's earned us body bags and our prestige. Okay? And this is a very, very nice, I'm being very, very generous. We're talking about negative $2.8 trillion, okay? That's the cost of this. That's the cost of this. We lost control of all of that oil. The pipeline that Dick Cheney wanted to build is not coming through now. It's going straight north to China. We lost that whole game. We lost the Middle East. Iran ended up in control of all of that. They're the most influential power in the Middle East because we had to do this projected power thing. Okay, so we're negative 2.8 trillion. Let's see what China did. Well, China expanded into Walmart. More shelf space at Best Buy. That's a lot better than Syria or Iraq. What else did they get? They get control of U.S. debt, which means they get control of the United States Congress. What does it earn China? Well, let's see. They make $3 billion, plus they control $4.6 trillion. And I guarantee you that number is nothing compared to what's in the paragraph to the parentheses next to it. What's the value of the acquired IP? What's the value of knowing how to put together that Prius battery pack? When John and I and Kirk Sorensen and some other folks that were here went to Oak Ridge, we got to speak at Oak Ridge, and the day before we got there, the Chinese government had announced that they intended to develop thorium molten salt, and they were going to control it and develop it on a commercial basis, and they were going to enforce IP. How about that? So, China's going to do with the molten salt reactor what they did with the rare earth industry. This is going to be the most important industry in the world. If I can tell you that you have safe energy and your fuel's free, and the amount of waste you have to deal with is minuscule, and you deal with it in geologic terms that human beings understand, 300 years, 500 years. What's the oldest building structure, human structure on Earth? Maybe the pyramids in Giza, 5,000 years old? What's the storage life, geologic storage requirement for spent fuel? 100,000 years? Forget it. This thing puts everything within terms human beings can deal with. So they're going to do this, and to some, I can't say this loud enough, so I capitalized it. They're not going to share this. When Oak Ridge and MIT and Berkeley are done giving away everything, nothing's coming back. Well, one thing's coming back. They're going to lease us this technology on a kilowatt per hour basis. No civilization could even dream of something so powerful as this. If I can provide the world safe, clean energy and there's literally no end to the fuel, your real cost of energy is the amortization of the capex to build the reactor. And of course, there's all the safety issues and observation, but quite frankly, those are minimal. They're de minimis. Whoever controls this is going to control everything that human beings do. Every time we build something, every time we use energy for anything, these guys are going to take a little part of it and they're going to put it in their pocket. This is global empire. The greatest thing it's going to do is it's going to end the combustion of coal. And what can you do with process heat? Well, process heat is where the value's at. And so they're going to not just be selling electricity or getting 1 cent per kilowatt hour for every bit of electricity we use when they lease us back our own machines. Everything we're doing, when we make petroleum products, when we make fertilizer, when we're making paint or plastics, they're going to actually squeeze themselves right into that process because they control the thermal side. Who here doesn't think water desalination is going to be one of the most important things this world has to deal with in 50 years? Well, they'll control that too. So China's developing this thing very rapidly with the help of our national labs, with the Department of Energy, with our institutions, with our universities. They've publicly said they're going to control this. How is it that we created it here, and this is the ultimate gift to humanity, and how is it that China will deliver this system and not the US? You need to find something that Congress can embrace. And what Congress can embrace is this idea of ending the rare earth monopoly, of bringing jobs back home. And when we talk to them, we say to them, you can't have one without the other. And some of them say, I hate nuclear. And we go, look, okay, it's literally 3 paragraphs, don't worry about it. It's just such a small part. Just shut it off and it's not there. We'll fix the rare earth problem. They can embrace that. And the language in the bill we're working on feels and seems so benign. We're basically saying we're going to transfer that thorium away from the guys who create technology metals and alloys and help bring Toshiba and Hitachi and GE back to the United States. We're going to do that, but you've got to take all that thorium and you've got to put it someplace, and you have to give us the authority to actually do something with it. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're creating an international platform sanctioned by the United States that says the United States wants to do this and we're serious about it. If we have the authority to develop uses and markets, including energy, and in the language, We are required to basically seek out users of energy, consumers of energy, and sovereign nations. So what do we have? A multinational investment development platform, open to public and private foreign participation. And it's the only big tent that says, hey, you don't have $1 billion, but you've got potential IP? Come into the tent, take some equity, work with us like they did at Bell Labs, and let's do this thing. This is the only way you're going to challenge China. And you literally need foreign sovereign participation. You need them to buy in, put money at risk, because if they see a cheaper version coming out of the South Sea, you don't want them to buy it. You want them to know that when the system we build together, our Airbus, our system is going to distribute the profit to the sovereigns. Remember, it's 11 cents is the average cost of electricity in the United States. The cost for thorium molten salt is I've seen 2. I believe it could be as low as 1 once you build these things on an assembly line, once you work out the material science. So what do you do with 10 cents? You split it with everyone who comes in and steps up to the table. You get the governments to buy in and see future revenues there. You get your investors to see long-term safe revenue. So this is how we build it. Those aren't rare earth mining companies. Those are mining companies that exist today, right now, that are throwing away 5 times what the United States needs in rare earths every year. They're throwing away every single year 40% of global rare earth consumption demand every year because of the thorium. Every single year, we could meet almost 50% of the world's needs in rare earths just from taking their trash, going through their trash and pulling out the rare earths. No one will do it until we solve the thorium problem. So we send all that stuff into a co-op that's owned by, the giants of industry. These are the people we need to buy into this. John and I have been having meetings with these folks, getting them to buy into the concept of an old-fashioned co-op, that commie thing. And we're having success. And then all of the risk, all of the liability associated with thorium gets transferred over to that Thorium Bank. And that Thorium Bank has that simple, elegant sentence to develop uses and markets, including energy. We need to complete the task that was left to us. And the only way we're going to do that is if we work together. And John and I have spent 5 years working on this. We know that most everyone in this room supports us for what we're doing. We need your continued support. Thorium Energy Alliance needs some support, including financial support. And I think John's coming up to kick me off, so I'm done.
Yeah. Thanks, man. We have some questions for Jim.
Could you please, in as few words as possible, specifically explain the thorium problem with rare earths? What is it that makes the problem?
Thorium was actually classified as a nuclear fuel in the early part of the atomic age. So by that classification, automatically, it falls in line and is compared with and regulated as if it would be uranium, 235, 238, plutonium. It's classified as a nuclear fuel, and with that comes a myriad of regulations and financial risks. There's some folks in this room that know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're pulling out rare earths and your deposit has, let's say, 8% rare earths, it may have 14% thorium. Where are you going to put it? What are you going to do with it? You put it someplace, and you're a target. You're a regulatory target. So nobody can touch it. The risks are unlimited. Mountain Pass, the last operating rare earth mine in the United States, was shut down because they spilled a little bit of thorium in the desert.
Specifically, the other sovereign nations, do you think would find this appealing?
Yes. So I have met with folks in Brazil who actually worked on the MSR in the early 70s that would be involved. John and I have been contacted from people from Abu Dhabi, Dubai. There's a lot of interest in England. Canada, of course. Canada's got some tremendous nuclear assets that are no longer being utilized, and all of those things could be rolled in. Once this thing is offered, and once it's understood to be an international platform where nobody's going to get treated badly, and that there's a regulatory pathway, the money will flood in. The money will flood in from users, from consumers, and from sovereigns who aren't going to want to miss the boat. They're going to want to be in this, because if they don't do it with us, they're buying them from China.
Very good. Thanks, Jim. Jim's available for birthdays and bar mitzvahs too.